I grew up with it. My parents are British West Indians. I grew up hearing The Wind in the Willows read to me, which is a early 20th century English novel in which animals are the principal characters. I also grew up hearing Charles Dickens's novels read. So it's part of my frame of reference, part of my heritage. My favorite book, my favorite author, all of these things change. My favorite book, or one of them, is The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, written by Lawrence Sterne in the mid-18th century. So it's outside of my area of immediate expertise, or at least outside of what I was hired here to teach. That doesn't stop me from loving that, and I wrote my master's thesis on it. I also love Joseph Heller's Catch-22, which is a book many students will remember from high school. It's a book that is steeped in irony, and I love irony, just as I love the minor key in music. Favorite class would have to be the Romantic Poets course. The first time I taught that, I was terribly nervous that I wouldn't do a very good job. I had a kind of phobia to poetry, the way some people, well, the way even I had a phobia to math. But I dealt with the phobia to poetry the same way I dealt with the phobia to math, which is just do more. So that's what I did, and the first time I taught that course here, it was wonderful, and so I have taught it over the years ever since, and every group is different, and every group is wonderful, and insightful, and helps me to see the poetry in all sorts of different ways that I hadn't considered. So I learn a great deal from teaching that course. And there's a lot of give and take between me and the students in that course. So I particularly enjoy that one. I like Mary Robinson. She's a wonderful poet. Her poetry is very much a function of her very public, scandal-ridden life. But she begins life as an honest and very young wife, but then she becomes mistress to the Prince Regent of England because he sees her acting the part of Perdita in a play on stage and instantly becomes smitten by her and has to have her, and he pays her a settlement of £20,000, or at least he offers this to her. He never actually pays her. She spends a lot of her time actually fighting for that money. But he pays her this so that she'll leave the stage. And then from there on out, she becomes essentially the subject of every piece of scandal or piece of social news that's in circulation at the time. But her poetry is very engaged in what's happening in France, which is the aftermath of the French Revolution, as the revolution heads into its more cynical, some would say reactionary phase. And as she watches all the promise of 1789 and the fall of the Bastille turn into the Reign of Terror and the White Terror and the rise of Napoleon. So her poetry is really fascinating because it's beautiful, but it's also engaged at the same time. And people seem to think poetry has to be one or the other. Okay, the second time I taught Jane Austen in film, it dawned on me that I couldn't make my students understand why dance was so important in Jane Austen's novels. and I couldn't quite convey to them. I could get it through to them intellectually. They could pick it up intellectually. Oh, dance is important for courtship. But because they didn't know anything about the dances, they didn't know actually how dance could facilitate courtship beyond what was in their immediate frame of reference, you know, from their own experiences with modern dancing and modern courtship. So I asked someone from the Rochester Country Dance Group to come down the second time I taught the course and teach my students just a few dances to give them a sense of what dance was like in the period and what it felt like to do those dances and how there might be opportunities for couples to court in that context. And so their understanding of the dynamics of relationships in Jane Austen's novels changed completely once they'd had that experience. I want people to understand that the past is not just a museum piece, that there's so many aspects of it that relate to our present day context. There's so many things the past and present have in common, but the things that are different are fascinating. And so from there onward, I built it into the course. I've never been constrained in my teaching. Less stressed in general, yes, but other things have come in to fill the vacuum left by my untenured status. So there will always be stresses, you know, that will replace the stress of being an untenured faculty member. But it is nice not to have to think about that anymore and to feel free to experiment even more. But I have to say, I've never felt particularly constrained. This has been a very good environment to work in. I've always had the 19th century all to myself. And I have even begun poaching on Grant Hawley's territory in the 18th century. So I get quite a lot of variety in my teaching life. I can experiment in all kinds of ways, and I can have students do English country dance as part of a course. You know, and that I started doing long before I was tenured. So tenure does make things a lot less stressful at work. But there's other stuff to replace that stress. Well, I'm the representative from the Committee on Academic Affairs to that committee. So one of the things that I'm tasked with is helping the members of the committee and helping the members of the global education department to figure out exactly how rigorous a program needs to be academically. We know most programs offer really good enrichment for students, but we have to make sure that the courses they offer are of comparable difficulty and are taught by qualified people in the way that the courses at HWS are taught. So we have to make sure that the academic standards are maintained abroad. So that's what I do on the committee, but it's also what the other committee members do as well. What it's like being on the committee is a constant learning experience. Sometimes that's great, at other times not so great. But it's always a learning experience. And it's given me a window on a lot of different programs that I kind of knew existed, and now I know a little bit more about them, and that's very nice because I have advisees and I can kind of steer them to programs that I think will be useful. My phone is ringing. I have to answer it. Yeah, the biggest challenge is of being a professor, of being a woman who's a professor, is in my experience, time management, because I do have a lot to do. I have 2 4-year-olds who get me up at 6 in the morning, and sometimes oftener and earlier because of nightmares, sicknesses, etc. Whether I get enough sleep or not, I still have to come in and teach. I still have to prepare for each class and each session of each class. So even if I'm teaching 2 sections of a class, each group is different. So each group requires a certain amount of preparation before each class. I have to do grading. I have to develop assignments. I have to make sure the assignments are put up on Canvas or delivered to my students in some other useful way. I do have to do research. I still have to produce scholarship. I still have to do community service to the campus. I still have to develop new courses to offer in future. So time management, I think, would be the biggest thing. I always tell people that my proudest achievement is never missing a day's teaching when I got back from maternity leave, even though the babysitter I had lined up had quit. And so the first day back to work, I came in with 2 car seats with 2 babies, 5 months old, and set them up in my office, and had to do that subsequently pretty often because of childcare being difficult, especially when you're dealing with 2 infants. So challenging.